Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Mindrise podcast. I'm your host, Bailey Fruman, psychotherapist, coach, author of Own Your Power, as well as founder at Mindrise. Today, we are going to be talking to Alex Nelson about breaking free of our patterns. Alex is a life coach, plant medicine facilitator, and the host of the Through the Veil podcast. Alex has spent the last 7 years working with clients to help them to break free of old trauma, old patterns, and outdated beliefs. I invite you to dive in and join me through this conversation with Alex as we talk about breaking through our patterns and our old beliefs, our old stuff, to shed the light for who we are becoming. Be sure to subscribe to the Mindrise podcast on Apple, Spotify, Google, and on YouTube. All right, so big thanks to Alex Nelson for joining us for today. We have Alex on today's episode to talk to us about breaking free of old patterns. And Alex, you're best known for your podcast, Through the Veil, and as a life coach, plant medicine facilitator. And you've spent the last 7 years helping people to break free from trauma, old patterns, and outdated beliefs. So what I'm super curious about is what was the catalyst that took you from where you were, 7 or so years ago to where you are right now?
Absolutely. It's a great question. So first of all, thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here. When I was 16 to the age of about 22, I was a pretty bad alcoholic. I was drinking 5-6 nights a week and really had crafted my whole identity around partying and knowing where the good parties were and all of that. And, I was working a job where I was the manager of this off-site location for a pet food company. And for someone with no college degree, I was actually doing quite well for myself at the age of 20 to 22. And I was making good money, but I kept missing days of work because I'd be hungover and didn't go in. And so I got fired. And that was a bit of a wake-up call for me of oh shit, this is not good. If I want to aim at my life's purpose, whatever that may be, I can't be self-sabotaging like this. So that led me to trying to quit drinking, failing, trying again, failing again. And finally, I was at kind of my wit's end, or I was sort of just accepting my lot in life. All right, this is going to be an issue forever. I guess we're just going to deal with this. And, I heard Tim Ferriss on a very, very early episode of his podcast just offhandedly mention, I took some psilocybin mushrooms and it really helped with my depression. And I was like, interesting. I've tried what feels like everything else at this point. So what is there to lose? So I had a very intentional inward plant medicine journey with mushrooms, and it really shifted a lot for me. To make a long story very short, over the course of a couple sessions, I ended up not drinking for an entire year after that, completely off, and have since reforged a healthier relationship with alcohol. And that kind of opened my eyes to just the science and the way that change can be created, whether it's habits, addictions, traumas, and what really runs the show behind the scenes. So as a interest point, I started to work with, close friends and family members one-on-one, and kind of developed my practice over the course of the next 7 years after that, to where I am now today. So that's the shortened version of the story.
Right. Well, you make a good point, because there is always a catalyst. Sometimes it's the aha, da-da-da-da, this is what I'm meant to do. And sometimes it's that face down in the dirt, I really can't go on with life functioning like this. And this assumption that maybe this is what life will look like for me. So no, I appreciate you sharing the story, because we all have a start point, right? It's not all roses and sunshine and super sexy abs on Instagram.
Right.
There's a backstory. And speaking of backstory, something else that you brought up that I think is particularly poignant is yes, drinking alcohol was the symptom, but it's we drank for a reason, and that's what's behind the veil, right?
Yeah. Yeah. For me, that was, lack of self-love, not having my own identity. I'd created, my ego had made this beautiful story around like, I know where the cool parties are, I'm getting the pretty girls. And especially as a man, that's a very like, society's reinforcing that story. All my guy friends be like, dude, you're killing it. It's awesome. And I'd wake up and just feel empty and have this sense of like lack. So it is, what it allowed me to do is investigate those deeper reasons of self-love and of knowing my purpose and creating an identity around aiming at my purpose rather than an identity around a cool party.
Right. But you make a good point. When it's a game, and it's almost like we gamify how to play this video game of life. Yeah, that the cheese for the mouse is like the cool party, the affirmations from the friends, getting the girls. But now, 7 years and this journey and this wisdom later, like, what would you say is your purpose? Like, what does make you tick? Like, who are you really?
It's a great question. So I think at my core, my deepest level of my purpose is to help other people wake up to the fact that they live inside of a story. And this story is what we choose it to be. And we all have chapters of our life that are not great, and various different traumas, whether those are huge capital T or little t traumas. We have these various things that kind of subconsciously run the way we run our life and run our story. And so really what I do at its core through the various different modalities is help people wake up to that fact and to investigate their story and just kind of ask the question, like, is that story working for you? Is that the story you want? When you get to the end of your life and you read your book back, are you going to be excited about what you're reading right now? Or are you going to be like, ooh, that's where I turned away from my purpose. That's where I turned away from what I knew I should be doing. So at its core, that's what I do. I'm especially lit up by working with men, I find, simply because that's my area of expertise. And there's a lot of men right now who are really suffering with a lack of community, a lack of feeling that tribe. So I feel I can be especially of service there, but I do work with women as well.
So Alex, you make a good point. Like, that different populations are suffering, and particularly your specialty is working with men. But what do you think is the overarching narrative that most men are kind of carrying right now that's dictating how they are showing up, navigating, or even developing their narrative?
Yeah, it's a couple things. I think the main difficulty most men are experiencing, and it's not to say that women have a perfect version of this. Women have their own like super difficult separate challenges, but one thing a lot of women get from their female friends is the ability to emotionally express with each other and to share and to really feel connected in that way, which is something most men do not have. And that specifically causes a multitude of issues, but primarily what it causes is this just feeling of aloneness. And I see a lot of men who feel just alone, like it's just them. They're the only one that's feeling what they feel. They're the only one that's going through what they're going to. And it's objectively not true, of course. But until you can hear a couple other men speak their story and hear similar experience be shared, you don't realize that. You just think you're suffering alone. And, for most heterosexual men, that kind of will unburden all of this on their partner. And that's the only receptacle for their fullness of what they're feeling, because it's the only place that feels safe. And so the practice has been, bringing men together in community and giving them containers in which to communicate with each other and talk about like really what's going on internally. Because it's, when you're suffering and you're in pain in some way, if you feel like you're alone in that pain, it makes it infinitely worse. But when you just know even one other person is going through a similar thing, it's so much easier. You're just like, oh shit, I'm not uniquely messed up. It's not just me. So.
Right. I hear you. And that's based on vulnerability, when we are able to look at each other and say, yeah, me too, or I've been there, or Totally. That was me last year. And here I am on the other side, right? So what do you think allows people to lift that veil, allows people to open themselves to vulnerability and to sharing, right? Because we keep it high and tight right here all the time, especially, and I hear what you're saying, the archetype of the heterosexual male is that, we're exactly the warrior, nothing to see here. Everything is fine. And inside it's brewing and it's brewing and it's brewing.
Yeah. And I think, to give the devil its due, what most men intuit is that sharing their emotions isn't okay, which isn't true, but it has threads of truth to it. So the threads that are true are, it's probably not okay to just spill your entire emotional state onto one person and overwhelm them with everything that you're feeling. And they're also a different gender than you. So maybe the challenges that you're experiencing aren't even relatable to them. So it's like a lot of men have an intuition about this, like it's not safe to share. And they might be right. The thing I reflect on is in past times, men would go out hunting together, or they would have some activity where they would all go do it together. And in doing that activity, there'd be this connection, this sharing, this bonding. So it used to be built into the fabric of society. Obviously, we've become increasingly disconnected from that way of life. And as that's happened, we've seen some of these symptoms arise. So when I'm creating intentional community for men, the most important thing is having one or two people who are willing to go first. That is the biggest possible catalyst that you can give, is the permission of, just being super real, like, not to get too in the dirt of it, but like, if one guy can go, hey, yeah, I was with this really beautiful woman the other day and I experienced premature ejaculation, then every other guy has permission to be like, oh, fuck, okay, cool. I can open up about my shit too. Because every guy I've ever talked to has experienced that. I've not met one yet who's like, nope, never had that problem. So it's like, it immediately gives the permissiveness for every other man in the room to go, oh, okay, fuck, well, cool. All right, now I can share and open up about what's real for me. So just being willing to be that person to go first and to share vulnerably first creates the safety in the room for others to feel like they can jump in. And that's what then creates the dynamic that we're seeking.
Yeah, no, I definitely am picking up what you're putting down there. So I guess what I'm curious about is like, what was along this journey so far, right? You still have plenty of chapters to write going forward, but what was your biggest fear and how did you overcome it?
My biggest fear, I think for a long time, and potentially still pieces of this are active now. My biggest fear was to try with 100% effort. To just paint a little bit of the picture. Growing up, my parents in love, but would not think about the consequence of this. They would always make sure that, like, if I didn't finish my homework at school, that I got an extra week extension and I could get it done. Or if something didn't go right, that they would like fix it for me. And it was beautiful in terms of the intention, but what it created in me was a real fear of failure, because I hadn't gotten the chance to naturally fail very often at all. And so the fear for me was always, I would always hold back and not try fully, because at least if I give 70% effort and I fail, the story I can paint in my own head is like, well, I didn't really try. If I really tried, I wouldn't have failed, which is like, it's a sexy story to tell yourself, but it's not a good way to live your life. So that's the thing I even still bump up against, is that wanting to kind of like play small, because what if I try at 100% and fail? So that's probably the biggest thing for me that I had to overcome, and I'm still overcoming.
Yeah. So what are you doing to overcome it? Because I hear what you're saying. I remember distinctly sitting with someone and they said, to the vein of this concept, they said, don't leave room for the exit strategy. Right. And we do when we give 70%, and then we're like, oh, well, if I really tried, like I would have achieved it. But so what are you now doing? Like, what are some of your favorite tools to help you to overcome this? Because you're not alone in it, for sure.
We certainly all experience some degree of this. And My main tools, I would say, that are applicable broadly, and then some that are specific to me. Number one would be just journaling. Journaling really helps me to, it's easy to, for me, it's often easy to weave a really good story about why I did something, post hoc, after the fact. And in doing that, I can convince myself almost anything was like a choice, or like I did this for a good reason. And the reality of it is often not that. It's often that I was scared, so I turned away, or whatever it is. Journaling gives you this chance to abstract your mind from the experience of your mind. And in doing so, you can really read. And if you read 10 journal entries from the past 10 days, you see the multitude of decisions. And you go, look at the way that I did that same decision 5 days in a row. Oh, okay. That cute story I'm telling myself about why I'm doing that is not really real. And I'm turning away from that because I'm scared. So that's tool number one. Tool number two would just be, in the moments where I'm feeling that fear, at first, you're not going to be great at identifying it for people who are like just starting. You will develop the ability to identify it over time. So it is a practice like everything else. And in the moments where I'm feeling the fear or the not wanting to fully try, just asking myself the simple question, do I want to look back at this moment at the end of my life? Like really doing that sort of memento mori type of practice of like, when I die, whenever that is, do I want this to be the moment where I'm like, and it could be something stupid. It could be like jumping on this podcast. Let's say I was like, no, I can't do it. I don't want to. And do I want that to be the thing at the end of my life? It's like eating at me. And it's just like, do you remember when you were going to hop on the podcast with Bailey and you didn't because you were scared? Like, no, I don't want that to be the thing eating at me. Okay, I'm going to do this. So just identifying in real time some things that are specific to me that I don't, often when I talk about plant medicines, I want to be very clear that these are not recommendations. These are simply personal experiences, and that for each person, the path will be different. And although I am a facilitator, I certainly am not of the opinion that everyone should do this. I think there are a lot of people who shouldn't. All those caveats to the side, what I find helpful is to do a couple of journeys a year that are sort of a check-in. Because the psychedelic experience allows you to take ego partially out of the equation and to really critically analyze pieces of your life. So that kind of becomes a chance for me to see my decisions without the story, and then to really go, good decision, good decision. Ooh, that is not in resonance with the path I want to take with my life. Okay, why did I make that decision? Let's investigate. Let's see what triggers, patterning, things below the surface are actually causing that. So that's the practice that's specific to me, that a couple times a year check-in, that kind of helps me stay true to my path.
Right. And Alex, I think you make a good point. There are some practices that can be universal, and there's some practices that are specific to us because we took the time to ask ourselves, is this for me? Mm-hmm. For whatever it is. Whether it is, a shamanic healing, whether it is a plant medicine, whether it is, being a marathon runner, right? Everybody has their own path that's helping to guide them and get them in alignment with how they want to feel to break through these patterns. Yeah. So it's funny. I was in yoga class this morning, and this poem was shared. It's called Invitation by Oriya Mountain Dreamer. Okay, because of course that's her name. Yeah. But, and I'll send it to you, and I'll make sure that it's in the show notes. But the last line, I was like, oh my God, Alex is gonna love this. Mm-hmm. It says, I want to know if you can be alone with yourself and if you truly like the company you keep in the empty moments. Mm. Right?
I love this poem, by the way. I've read it.
Okay, the invitation, right? So I guess the last line is particularly sticking out for me at this moment, because it is about that company that we keep. Because we could put on a really good face, like, here I am with my job and my LinkedIn profile, and here's my family, or my attractive partner, or 2.5 kids, my dog, my picket fence, whatever our billboard is. Mm-hmm. But what allows us to get comfortable and know and enjoy the company that we keep in the empty moments?
Yeah, it's really this is one of the critical issues of our society right now, is we have an ever increasing multitude of tools to avoid silence and being with self. And I think something that was really painful for me to wake up to at various different points of my life was just how many things I was doing that were coping mechanisms. Because it was like everything. It was the food I ate, it was the decisions I made, it was how hard I worked or how hard I didn't work. It was what I used for entertainment. It was whether I partied. It was all of these different pieces. And, you know, people often will have an experience as they begin to tune into themselves of like, they become aware. I like to conceptualize it like this, like you have the Hoover Dam, and behind the Hoover Dam is every emotion that has been waiting to be felt that you have refused to feel for 10 years. And so people kind of sometimes they'll like open part of the Hoover Dam, and those emotions start to rush through, and it feels super, super overwhelming. And it's just like, oh my God, I think I'm dying. And that experience people turn away from a lot. And then they find their coping mechanism. They go, oh yeah, meditation didn't work for me. And it's like, well, you got 3 days deep. You realized, I don't really like how this stuff feels here. Okay, we got to try something else. Let's just run away. And the thing I give as just sort of a salve to those wounds is that eventually that stream stabilizes. So we build up all this stuff that we've refused to feel that's stuck behind the dam. When you open the dam up, or ideally blow the dam up entirely so it's not there anymore, there's an initial rush of water and you'll feel like you're getting swept away. And that's where using tools like coaches or someone that you have to talk to, that close friend who can just commiserate and really like hold space for your emotions, is super important. And then just knowing that that will pass, and eventually the river becomes a beautiful river. And sometimes it does rain upstream, you know, something bad happens, a parent passes away. It's really difficult. And then there's a rush of water from that rain, but then the stream stabilizes again. And really that's what I like to focus people on is, yeah, you know, you probably will spend 2 to 5 weeks really in the shit of it when you first start to do this work, but 2 to 5 weeks is nothing.
Right. I hear you. It's the 2 to 5 weeks. And if we start to open it and we feel that rush, right, I think that in many ways, when we haven't committed fully or don't have the supports in place, many times we'll do everything we can to jam stuff in to the dam so that that feeling stops. And you're right, having support system, whether it's coaching or having or journaling practice. I know for us, we have a journal service, like a reflection questions that come out each week. And having something to kind of anchor into in your focus, like even though those feelings are happening, like they have a pathway with which to feel through. Absolutely. So in this journey that you've had, right, on these many years on the planet, what would you say has been one of your biggest aha moments, right? Can you remember one of those aha moments and share that with us along this journey?
My biggest aha moments. I think there's one in particular that comes to mind, and it was from my first set of 3 mushroom journeys. So the first journey, I had this experience of every molecule of my being kind of like dissolving into the universe, which sounds scary, but it was what it was. And it was surrounded by like complete unconditional love. And at a point in my life where I had so little self-love, it was a really healing experience, but it was also a very potent set point. Like, this is how you could feel about yourself. So that was transformative. Then the second experience kind of was the opposite of that. It was raking me over the coals of every, friend I had sort of betrayed, or every time I had like lied to someone because I wanted to go to a different party, whatever it was. So kind of like dragged me through all those decisions. And that really was also a potent teacher of getting to see oh, wow. When I'm acting, and this is hard for people to hear, but it's true. When we're acting deeply in pain and self-pity and, fear and anger, we often don't even think, like we're in a very selfish mode. We're literally in self. We're consumed by the experience of self. We don't realize how we're hurting the people around us. And that was a wake-up call for me. And then the third experience was sort of looking up at the mountain of my purpose and seeing like, wow, that's a big purpose. Oh my God, that, the mountain goes up through the clouds. This is amazing. And then looking around and kind of going, oh, I'm at the bottom of the mountain right now. And every time I self-sabotage, I'm sliding right back down to the bottom. Oof. Okay. So it's this like felt sense of, here's how I can exist. Here's how my decisions and when I'm consumed by self, how that impacts others. And like, here's my North Star of what I'm aiming at. These pieces all fit together. The other one that was more recent, that's, still pretty raw, was as I was transitioning out of a relationship, I kind of had this insider realization through a retreat I went on down in Ecuador, that basically I had known the relationship needed to transition for probably a year. And that was really, really painful to me because it was someone I love deeply, still do, but as a friend. And so it was hard to sort of look at it. And every time something would bubble up or we'd have a little argument or something needed to be worked through, we would both kind of look at, the truth of what probably needed to happen. And we'd both kind of go like, man, let's not look at that right now. That's really painful and it's going to require a lot of reorganization of life and all these things. And so what was illustrated to me, or what was the big aha moment through one of the journeys down in Ecuador, was just this sense of like, that was my little boy energy. Like that was the energy of looking away and not dealing with what was true in the moment. And for me to live my fully embodied life, what I need to do is not look away from stuff like that. Like not only is it not fair to my partner at the time, it's not fair to me. And so that also was an aha moment that was, 4 or 5 months ago at this point. That was very, very potent, very difficult, and still is a transition, but was an important step to take.
Wow, thank you for sharing that with us, because I think that's really powerful, Alex. And I think that people can relate if they allow themselves to really like feel that. Would you mind, and believe me, I'm feeling like a part two. We're going to need another episode on this aspect, but just if you can touch upon, like when you said that little boy energy, can you talk a little bit about how we have different energies that we show up in and where we can be aware of those and how we can act through? I know we're talking a whole nother episode, of course, but can you touch upon that? Like talking about the different energies that we have?
Absolutely. So the way, there's a psychotherapy modality called internal family systems that I think does a great job of this. And they talk about all the different parts inside of you. We won't go too deep into that because that's, again, a whole nother 10-hour podcast. But I like to think of them as the different archetypes inside of you. This is Carl Jung's idea of the archetypes, that within us we have these different energies that are these large scale, either idealized forms of existence or negative forms of existence that we want to move away from. So an easy one is the king or the boy prince. So in my case, the boy prince, it's someone who has sort of come into their power prematurely. They don't know what they're doing. So they're just making random decisions. They're not willing to own their decisions. They're just kind of like floating through and hoping things go okay. Versus the king energy would be more along the lines of like a king doesn't look away. The king looks at the thing that needs to be looked at, takes action, makes a decision, and does what needs to be done, not just for selfishly, because that's a different shadow archetype, but for the good of the whole kingdom. So when we look at these different energies, the reason to engage with them is because they can provide psychological roadmaps of effective ways of being in your life. So that's why I find the most utility from them is as you investigate some of the different archetypes. For men, there's a really good book, King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, that kind of touches on the 4 main male archetypes. Women can have those too, of course, but For men, this is like the book for first reading. And it's really useful because it gives you some patterns of being. And just in the reading about the archetypes, you'll start to see yourself like, ooh, there's my shadow magician. Oh, that hurts. Okay, I do that all the time. Or, oh, I do actually embody some of that fully empowered warrior energy. Oh, that's actually a very positive thing about myself. I should try to do more of that. So it kind of like paints a picture of who you are, where you're at, things you want to move away from, and things you actually want to move towards.
Right. And from what you're saying, so I want to make sure for everyone who's listening, really clear, it's not an either or, like either you're the king or you're the magician. We have the opportunity to fluidly embody all of these different archetypes and energy centers within us. Absolutely.
And over-identification with one is almost its own negative archetype, because then you're trying to put your beautiful, unique personality too much in one box. And it's more about looking at the positive traits of each archetype that you would like to embody or already embody, and just actively seeking to bring more of those into yourself.
Right. And being aware, I think, of like when we're having a triggered reaction to something, as opposed to an intentional embodied reaction and choice. Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Very cool. So yeah, Alex, will you come back and talk to us more in depth on this? Another episode? Perfect. I'm like, because you know me, I'm just like salivating, wanting to dive in. I'm like, okay, well, we've got to wrap it up for today. But I'm curious for you, what's next as you elevate your life, right? You had that moment where you looked at the bottom of the mountain, you see the top of the mountain, you're like, that's my purpose. Wow. Oh my gosh, majestic. And I've got to climb. So next for you as you climb, as you elevate your life.
There's a couple different pieces, but shortly looking to move to Austin by around the end of the year-ish, open a couple of retreat centers. And just in the short term, the practice or the embodiment of my purpose is just, right now, what's really present is trust. As I'm spinning a lot of plates, and there's a lot of plates spinning that feel like they're not spinning, even though I'm like adding a lot of momentum to them. Just returning to that trust and knowing that if I stay in right accord with myself and I stay on alignment of what I know I need to be doing, that every time I've been in that space in my life, things work out, and they work out in the way that I'm actually aiming at. So that's the most present thing for me. Short term is like trust. And then long term, it's aiming at this retreat center, one outside of Austin, and then one somewhere else in the world, potentially Colombia or something. So
amazing. And again, we get to, right? That's our journey. We get to climb, we get to create, we get to do these things. And you bring up an important word. It's trust. And we put so much momentum in a direction. It almost feels like planting a seed, and we're out there and we're watering. We're like, okay, I'm watering mud. I'm just keep on watering this mud. Where's the fruits of my labor? But it's in that place, that understanding that it's gestating, right? It's coming to be.
Absolutely.
So as we close, what's the last piece of advice that you would have for people who are looking to elevate their life or play at their next level?
I think that's been most present for me lately is that your emotions are indicators or a compass for your life. And they are trying to point you in the direction of things that are out of alignment, whether that's internally or externally. And so when you treat them as such, it allows for a less adversarial relationship with them. Often we feel angry and then we tell ourselves, no, don't feel angry. Well, anger is just trying to show you perhaps a boundary that's been crossed or something that has not gone well with a friend or a family member. And so to really treat your emotions as the indicators that they are, and to walk through the process of trying to find out what they're trying to tell you. If you feel anxious all the time, literally sit down, eyes closed, and ask your anxiety what it wants to tell you. And if it tells you a lot at first, that's okay. That's what's going to happen for a lot of people. Just be patient with it and really start to create the relationship with your emotions as if it was another person inside of you. And as you do so, they will become increasingly intuitive and honed. So then instead of a low resolution picture of I'm angry, you'll have a high resolution picture of, ooh, this is my abandonment wound triggering right now. And also this person has crossed one of my major boundaries. These two things are interplaying. So I'm having a lot of difficulty, and that's manifesting as anger. And it's like when you can get that level of resolution on what you're feeling, it's a lot easier to navigate the world. So that'd be my invitation for everyone listening, is that tool.
That's beautifully said, and weaving that in with what we were talking about with journaling. One of my favorite things to do is when, needing to sit with those emotions, asking those emotions, like, what do I need to know? And letting them break through me or come through me. And it might sound woo-woo, but like, how's it working out for you on the other end? You're not, when you're just spinning top, because that's what life will do with us sometimes, is we'll spin rather than finding our true north. So Alex, thank you so much for joining us for today. You guys can find Alex on Through the Veil. That's his podcast. And he's also hanging out on Instagram. We'll make sure we'll put all that information in the show notes. And if you haven't already subscribed to the podcast, you can catch us on Apple, Google, Spotify, and YouTube. Thanks again for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.